Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Institute for Evidence-Based Change's Caring Campus webinar. This webinar is based on our second Caring Campus guide in our series, Providing Student Support Services in Extraordinary Times, a Caring Campus Approach. The second guide is about supporting your professional staff. My name is Jordan Horowitz. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and we'll get to some introductions in a moment. One note, we do not use the Q&A. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and at the end, when it comes time for questions, we will start by responding to common themes in the chat, and then we will open it up to further questions from all of you in attendance. Again, thank you so much for attending. As I mentioned, I'm Jordan Horowitz, the Chief Operating Officer here at the Institute for Evidence-Based Change. Also on the webinar is Brad Phillips, our Chief Executive Officer and President, and our special guest, Dr. Juliana Barnes, President of Cuyamaca College here in Southern California. We are recording the webinar, and you will receive a link via an email to the webinar once we get it cleaned up and posted on our website for you. As I mentioned, please use the chat function to ask questions, and we will be monitoring that. We do not use the Q&A function. Today, we're going to start with a brief overview of Caring Campus. Then we will move to some assumptions about colleges working in the virtual environment and provide some general considerations for that work. Then we'll get to some general behavioral commitments and 6 specific behavioral commitments for you regarding how you can support your professional staff as they do their work and reach out to students. We'll close with a little bit of news about what's coming up from the Institute for Evidence-Based Change, and of course, go to questions and answers. Caring Campus is grounded in the knowledge that students go where they feel welcome and stay where they feel cared about. We recognize that these times of social distancing and heightened awareness of equity issues are stressful times. It is essential that we help staff to do their job and acknowledge that this isn't business as usual. Like you, we've participated in many webinars and video conferences over the past few months. We hope you realize this webinar is different because we not only will inform you about what to do, but also present how to do it. Sure, we could tell you that to play a flute, you blow in one end and move your fingers over the holes, but frankly, that won't produce much music. We intend on getting into the details. IEBC's Caring Campus is grounded in research, beginning with Vincent Tinto's work Leaving College from 1993, in which he makes the case that student retention is grounded in students feeling connected to their college and are able to navigate the college environment. There's been considerable research since then, such as Richard Light's book, Making the Most of College, that present the importance of each student feeling connected to an individual at the college to be successful. Our focus is on professional staff. Professional staff are the unsung heroes of our colleges. They are the first contact students make, and they are the folks students are in contact with during stressful times, such as registration, financial aid applications, course drop dates, applications for degrees, and more. Leadership at the cabinet and department levels supports staff implementation campus-wide, as staff identify behavioral commitments to which they and their colleagues can commit that support students' sense of feeling cared for and connectedness to their campus. Caring Campus does not stand alone. It buttresses other student success initiatives. Professional staff are woefully unaware of the student success initiatives going on at many of our colleges. Although it is a major national effort, when we ask, typically 1/3 of the staff in the room have heard about guided pathways. And here in California, where the vision for success is the guiding framework for changing and improving student success throughout the state's community colleges, less than 10% typically are aware of the vision for success. Caring campus behavioral commitments, as you will see, have extremely low resource demands. In fact, the most expensive resource that we tend to run into is when staff believe everyone should be wearing name tags, so that when they walk around campus, it's obvious that they can be approached with questions by students or other guests. IEBC's Caring Campus employs a unique coaching facilitation model. When we went to the dictionary, we found that coaches do two things. They transmit the fundamentals, and our coaches work with staff at colleges around the country to ensure they understand the fundamentals of what it means for a student to be successful and to feel connected. Coaches also create a systematic and systemic implementation of these fundamentals, and our coaches also work with your colleges to ensure that the behavioral commitments are implemented intentionally and campus-wide and are institutionalized and sustained throughout the process and beyond. We're very proud that Caring Campus currently is in 56 colleges in 15 states around the country, with funding from the Ascendium Education Philanthropies and the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brad Phillips to get into the meat of the work.
Thank you so much. We have attendees from all over the country, and we really appreciate, especially those of you on the East Coast, staying later in the day to attend this webinar. We'd like to begin with some assumptions about the environment that we're now existing in and the difficulties and the challenges that can occur. First, in terms of an assumption, we are making the assumption that colleges do have the ability to forward calls to staff members at home, and that we also are assuming that professional staff are generally working at home most of the time, if not all of the time. And they can be at least connected by a telephone. That could be a landline, it could be their mobile phone, and that supervisors are in regular contact with staff members, and staff members are in regular contact with one another. In addition, they have a computer and the internet at least some of the time. We know that some of the challenges, especially when staff have kids at home and they need computer time, that it may be difficult to access that computer. Because of these environments that we are now existing in, we know that staff have additional distractions that they normally wouldn't have at work. And these responsibilities from working at home could be children home from school. It could be family responsibilities, taking care of children or an elderly adult. There could be crises occurring at home. There could be all sorts of things that are not normally occurring when a staff member is at the office during normal business hours. But that in the end, staff are willing, they're able, and they want to continue to work with and serve students. That's the key. Now, let's talk a little bit about some general considerations for working virtually. We're now using a tool, Zoom. We've all heard of Zoom bombing, where some unsavory individual comes in and disrupts a meeting. We've also heard of the term Zoom fatigue, where you are attending meeting after meeting on the computer or your telephone or your tablet, and it creates a sense of exhaustion that we're not used to. In addition, staff may have some concerns in working at home that add stress to their work tasks. They may not be able to access the materials they need. They may not be able to access supplies or documents. Normally the kinds of things that are right at their fingertips, they're not able to access. In addition to that, one of the things that we've been learning from the colleges that we're working with is that staff don't have access to one another in the same way. So it's not as if you can just walk around the corner and ask another colleague a question about an issue that a student has, that it can be at times much more difficult to access information in order to serve the students. Let's start with just some overall general behavioral commitments. Now, many of you have heard of a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And in that book, it talks about how men like to immediately jump in and solve a problem, And women like to listen, take a step back, be empathetic. Unfortunately, educators tend to be from Mars. They like to try to fix a problem, and they're not necessarily taking a step back and listening attentively. One of the things that we have learned is it's important to really reflect back when you're talking with your colleagues, or as a supervisor, you're talking with the staff, or as staff talking with the supervisor. It's important to listen actively. And what do we mean by that? It's helpful if you repeat what the person said by possibly reframing it or simply summarizing what they said. That ensures that the people that you're talking with feel that they are heard by you. It's also important to really listen and not jump in and say, well, this is how you address that problem. Take a step back, check in, and then work on problem resolution. And finally, in terms of a general behavioral commitment, because we are socially distancing and we are socially isolated, we don't often know if there is follow-through on a request or an issue. So it's important that a feedback loop be built into an issue that comes up, so that when a staff member addresses an issue and they need help from a supervisor, that the supervisor checks back in with them and says, here's how the issue was addressed. Now, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing our guest speaker. Dr. Juliana Barnes is the president of Cuyamaca College, and she's going to be telling us how she addresses Behavioral Commitment 1, which is the president holding a weekly open chat session with college staff. The reason why this commitment is so important is that the idea of a caring campus really does come from the top. And one of the wonderful things that Dr. Barnes has done with Cuyamaca College is she's leveraged the work that we have started at Cuyamaca under Caring Campus and has branded it Cuyamaca Cares. And with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Barnes to begin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phillips. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to spend a few minutes with you today, just sharing a little peek at what I do as college president. And today I'm going to be able to highlight what I call virtual hall chats. And just for context, this is just one of 6 behavioral commitments that will be covered today, and I will just be covering behavioral commitment number 1. I do want to share that these chats that I'm going to speak about join other approaches that I've employed to just be accessible and to facilitate connection, particularly in this remote world, and to convey, this caring campus message that we all value. In addition to my virtual hall chats, I've also hosted, like many of you, a variety of forums. Some have been very general, and some have been more focused on a particular topic, such as returning back to campus after COVID, or budget matters. And of course, most recently, I've been able to hold critical conversations about race and racism and anti-Blackness. And so again, today, though, I will just share again the peekaboo look at these casual encounters that I call virtual hall chats. So with regard to the virtual hall chats, let me just kind of point out here, we may even have them on the line. This is one of the chats that I had with a member of our financial aid department, and also a member of our CalWorks department. They happen to be married, Mike and Sarah Allen, and their lovely dog. And they joined me in the hall chat not that long ago. And I just saw that they are here. They're saying we are here. So I am happy to feature them today. And let me just tell you how this whole matter of virtual hall chats kind of came about. As was mentioned earlier, many of us are spending lots of hours in Zoom meetings daily. I myself spend probably about 6 to 8 hours in Zooms, but it didn't feel like it was enough. There was still something missing, because there were, these meetings that I'm in, that there's particular members of the college community and my district community who are in these meetings, but it just wasn't enough. And so I recognized that these casual conversations, these water cooler conversations, so to speak, that that I would have the opportunity and blessing to have as I walked through campus, as I grabbed a snack, as I went to a meeting, as I went to the break room. Those casual conversations were no longer happening in this Zoom setting. So, and I would often say, hey, I'll see you in the hall. And so hence this idea of these virtual hall chats came about. This is a lovely slide of one of our deans, Nicole Jones, who visited me not that long ago, also in the hall chat. And so what does this look like? So how do I carry it out? What are the logistics? So what I do is I set varied times throughout the week. So I have some morning times, I have some evening times, and the times that I set are in 10-minute increments. So there's 10 minutes, 10-minute increments. And what folks have to do is they have to, they go to a little link and then they sign up for the hall chat. And I'll tell you, when I say be flexible, what's happening is that I'm realizing that more people want to see me, which was a really beautiful surprise that I realized. And so I do not turn anyone away. So I add more times, either in the morning or the afternoon, or in a whole nother day, if that wasn't already part of the scheduled times. And so I'm just very flexible with being available to my college community. Being open to any topic. So when I send out the invitation, it says on the invitation, chats will be scheduled in 10-minute windows of time where you could come by to say hello, ask questions, share your thoughts and suggestions, etc. And so I'm just very open to whatever the topic might be. And I was surprised to learn that most of the hall chats that I've had, and there have already been dozens and dozens and dozens of them, they are generally just to pop in to say hello. There are some that there's an issue or a topic that they want to talk about, but primarily it's just to make the connection. And I found that really beautiful and enlightening. And then with regard to the Zoom itself, I think many of us have used the wait room feature. So what happens, because these are 10-minute increments, and many of them are back to back, what happens is I'm meeting with an individual, and then when the 10 minutes is about to end, the wait room feature then kind of pops up and says somebody's waiting for you, and then I close it up with that particular individual and then bring the other person into the hall chat. And so then, and then we just have a short but sweet conversation, and very enjoyable. So enjoying the interaction is always a must. And then the other thing is always following up afterwards. I think that was mentioned earlier. And it could be as simple as, thanks for dropping in, or, if there was an issue or a matter. And then this is just, this is my last slide. And this is just one of the emails that I got after one of my conversations. Thank you for the hall chat. I really enjoyed the time visiting with you. This past weekend, I finally had the chance to watch the Michelle Obama book tour documentary. It highlighted her ability to connect personally and electronically with both huge arenas and one-to-one individuals. I think you have the same gift with thanks and joy. And again, this was not about me, although I loved the connection with Michelle Obama, but this was not about me. But this was, again, just about the connection and the care, the kind of the mutual connection, that mutual care that was able to take place in this very short but sweet virtual casual interaction, again, that I'm calling virtual hall chats. So that's, again, just a little peek at what I do as college president to convey, my care to facilitate that accessibility and that connection, and at my college, that under that umbrella that we call Cuyamaca Care. So thank you again for allowing me to share. I see some of my peeps are on the line. So Natalia Warral is our Classified Senate president. I see her in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. And I just would like to summarize a bit, Dr. Barnes, of what you're saying. And that is, it's really critical for leadership. And those of you that are college presidents on, vice presidents on, supervisors on, in terms of a leadership role, is making that critical connection with the staff. and ensuring that they feel cared about. Because if we think about this issue, it's very difficult to care for students in these COVID-19 times if we do not feel cared about as staff from the leadership. So I want to thank you, Dr. Barnes, for what you do in supporting the staff at Cuyamaca College. So let's get started with behavioral commitment 2. And that is vice presidents are setting clear expectations of supervisors. So as President Barnes was saying, it starts from the top. And in terms of a commitment for senior leadership, it's important that they not only set the expectations, but they model the expectations that supervisors will be supportive of staff. Now, we work with a number of colleges across the US, and one of the things I would suggest you don't do, and we have some colleges that have done this, is they check in with staff every single hour to see how staff are doing. There is a point where it's too much, and that is, it's important that these check-ins are regular but not onerous. But in terms of vice presidents setting those clear expectations, they really need to be clear with supervisors about how and when. In terms of behavioral commitment number 3, this has to do with our supervisors checking in with each staff member. So those supervisors on the line, it's really important that you take some time when you talk with your staff to not begin with the work that's needed and not begin with things that are being done or not being done, but rather to simply start with, how's it going today? How are you doing? Are there any challenges or issues that you're coming up with, that you're encountering that need to be addressed? And it's important, again, and we can't emphasize this enough, but to be sensitive to the demands that professionals have when they are working from home. As you can see from the picture on the slide, there's a gentleman there on the phone working with the baby who wants to play with probably the computer there. As you saw from Dr. Barnes' slide, there was a couple holding their dog. There are so many things that happen, and in many of the calls that we've done with colleges across the country, with staff across the country, you have a window into a person's home. And we've seen rabbits on people's laps. We've seen cats running across keyboards. There's all sorts of things going on, all sorts of demands happening. It is very different than working home. So that being sensitive is really critical. That said, it's important that there are expectations set in terms of what professional staff are expected to be accomplishing each day, but doing so in a very supportive way. That is, understanding and recognizing that there are issues that the home environment presents, but still work has to be done. And so sometimes it's a good idea to say, here is the and so let's move on to the next slide, behavioral commitment 4, in terms of regular staff meetings. We know that in a non-COVID environment, regular staff meetings generally occur, and they occur about once a week. But what we're finding is a number of colleges are doing staff meetings, but they're doing them voice only. And it's important that human beings see human beings' faces. We find this in our research world that when data is presented, it's important to show a student's face so that we take that data and we personalize it to the effect on a student. Well, the same thing happens with our staff meetings, that when we hear a disembodied voice, we're less engaged. But by adding faces using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever platform you're using to make sure that faces are shown. In addition to that, it's important that a regular time is scheduled during the week so that staff members can schedule their time to participate in the staff meeting a priori. We found the same things with students. In fact, one of the things that we learned is that students, when they attend labs, if a college says you have a certain amount of hours and those hours have to be completed by the end of the semester in that lab, they wait till the very last minute. They don't put it in their regularly weekly schedule. So it's important that that time stay at the same time every time. It's also important that when those staff meetings begin, before launching into what are we going to talk about today and what are the issues, that there's a quick round robin of check-ins and really checking on how people are doing in this environment. For those of us that are alone, it's tough, right? That we're not having that same kind of connection, and human beings really need that connection. It's also important that during each staff meeting, there's another round robin that talks about some positive activity, what's happened with students, how we've helped them, something good that's happening during these times. For behavioral commitment number 5, professional staff are supporting one another. It's a colleague-to-colleague connection. And what we're recommending is that staff not only check in with their supervisors on a regular basis, but also check in with at least one other colleague during the day. If you think about the non-COVID environment, we check in with our colleagues all the time. We go around the corner, walk by a cubicle, walk by an office, and say hello. We don't have that same issue with this environment. And so contacting staff, colleagues, one another, at least once a day is really important. And it also helps share the burden of support. What do we mean by that? Well, if we ask the supervisors to do the check-in only, that puts a lot of onus on the supervisor to do this. But we need to take responsibility and check in with one another to ensure that that burden of support is leveled out a little bit. Now, we're recommending that that check-in can either take place at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. It's good at the beginning of the day to talk with one another about what the workday holds, and at the end of the day, talk about what you've accomplished and the struggles and the issues that you've had. We also recommend a buddy system, and that buddy system is, in terms of commitment number 6, this is where professional staff are engaging in self-care. We know, and the data, the literature is very clear, that if we don't take care of ourselves, our physical well-being, we know that it influences our mental health and emotional well-being. And so it's important that we do things to help us feel better about ourselves. We'll talk about that in a minute. But also, it's important to monitor our exercise and food intake. I personally have a Fitbit, and I look at that Fitbit probably 10, 15 times a day to make sure I'm getting my steps or my exercise in. It's also important to monitor our food intake. It's really easy to sit all day and eat and eat and eat. And so we just wanted to share with you a bit of a funny. This is Batman after quarantine, because even Batman is isolated and eating and not exercising the way he should. In addition to monitoring our exercise and monitoring our food, it's important every day to sit back and reflect on how you've made a difference in students' lives. For our staff on the line today, you are doing a Herculean effort. You are supporting students each and every day, and students need your help. But at the end of the day, it's important to sit back and say, what did we do to help support students today? It's also important that every hour or so, stretch, take a walk, exercise, move your body at least once every 2 hours. So it's important that you get up and do something different than sit at your desk at home. What that does is it helps you feel less overwhelmed, and it helps you focus more. I don't know about you, but by 3 o'clock,
I just want to let you know that our third guide in the series, Providing Student Support Services in Extraordinary Times, a Caring Campus Approach, will be addressing student equity issues. We actually landed on this topic long before the killing of George Floyd, and we anticipate this guide will be even more important.
More questions. Jordan?
Thanks, Fred. Helpful to all of you moving forward. So you can look for that guide in the coming months. This webinar, and as well as the first webinar, will be available on our website, www.iebc.net. It's iebcnow.org. That is not correct. It's iebcnow with no period, .org. This webinar and the other webinar, if you go to News and Overview, there is a tab under that called Workshops and Webinars. Both of the guides also are available on our website. They're at the bottom of the front page of the IEBCnow.org website. Also, keep an eye out for upcoming newsletter. Everyone who registered for this conference is going to be placed onto our constant contact list, so you will start getting our newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch with us, either Brad or myself or Jen, questions, I just want to remind folks that we are not using the Q&A function. Please type your questions into the chat. A couple of themes that have come across, I'll just repeat. Yes, the webinar and as well as the first webinar are available on our website under News Overview, the tab Workshops and Webinars. And the first two guides also are available. So if you have any questions for us or any questions for Dr. Barnes about how she manages to do all of that and still, as well as her other official college duties, we're open to questions. Oh, I guess someone is raising their hand.
So we have a question that's come up, and Dr. Barnes, how and where do you promote the virtual chats?
Just electronically. So we do push them out to our college community several times throughout the week, and post those on our website. And so I think folks just kind of expect, that I'll be pushing out information in that way.
Oh, we have a question about recommending a specific chat or unified message client or app for staff. So we really, whatever you have access to and your staff have access to is what we would suggest using. We've used Zoom, we've used Microsoft Teams. We like Zoom because it allows us in our work, we use breakout groups quite often when we have large groups on a video conference. And Zoom allows breakout groups to happen very easily. The key, though, is to be able to see folks' faces. In our work on data use, we really looked into the neurobiology of how people interact with data and with each other. And folks, human beings are pre-wired to recognize and respond to other human faces. And that's why we think it's important to use a video conference app as opposed to simply going by phone. So that would certainly be our one large recommendation. Suggestions regarding ergonomics. We are not human ergonomics specialists, so I'm afraid I'd have to refer you out to a Google search on that one.
Well, it's also, I think, a very good point, though, and thank you for bringing that up. Colleges often have ergonomic standards for the workplace, so it'd be a good idea to see if those are available. They are often in the risk management office because of issues that occur with things like carpal tunnel and so forth. What's funny is I've just recently moved and I am in a new office today, but for the last few days, I've been sitting on a lounge chair and a computer on a box in my new dwelling because our furniture has not yet arrived yet. So there are clearly issues of ergonomics when you're at home.
There's a question about work-life balance, and this is not just for those of you on this webinar, but also things you might suggest to your staff to help them in self-care. One of the things is to set a schedule and set some rigor for yourself. You know, when I'm now back in my office, I'm in a one-person office, so I feel safe coming in and closing the door in this building, which has a lot of medical offices. Everyone's wearing masks and so on. But when I was working from home, it got to the point where I realized it was 11 o'clock already. I was still drinking coffee. I'd yet to shower. And I think that many of us get caught up in our work. We are diligent workers. And what I suggest, first of all, is to set a schedule for yourself. Do your self-care in the morning. Don't glance at those emails, check in before you're ready to start work. Make sure you set aside some lunchtime for yourself. Set a timer so that every 2 hours you actually get up and go for a little walk. There's also a method called the Pomodoro method, which is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, which is another strategy for ensuring that you're taking care of yourself and not getting overwhelmed and feeling like you're, as you note in your comment, living at work.
One of the other questions that we've gotten is, what's the best way to deal with a manager who is mostly concerned with having staff back in empty offices to do seat time rather than helping with remote work styles? I think it's really important at that point to document the work that's being done, because seat time doesn't create work being done. So understanding specifically what is the work that needs to be done each day, each week, and documenting the level of that work that has been completed. So seat time really doesn't count there. It's kind of like when the learning paradigm was first introduced years ago, and it was, instead of counting, as they said in the article, butts in seats, it's more important to measure the amount of learning that has taken place.
There are some questions for Dr. Barnes. Dr. Barnes, maybe you could address some of these questions. I'll read them off quickly. Why do you prefer the one-on-one to a group meeting, virtual chat? Are there any specific challenges that staff have shared that they've encountered while working remotely? And how big is Cuyamaca College, and how many people do you figure you've spoken with among the staff? So I think those are 3 issues you might be able to address.
Sure. Yeah, I was starting to write to Guy Hall right now, but I'll just respond verbally. Yeah, at this point, my virtual hall chats are one-on-one, and I do believe that that just provides just a unique kind of experience to make it, obviously that just that individual connection. But the idea of doing a virtual hall chat like in a group setting is intriguing. So that's something I'll explore. I kind of do that already through just regular meetings and through some of the forums that I have, where we actually then do smaller breakouts. We use this Zoom feature where we do smaller breakouts. So in that way, we kind of have more of a group virtual chat, but I like that idea. So thank you for that to Guy Hall. With regard to some of the other questions, specific challenges that staff have shared where they might be encountering, that they might encounter while working remotely. I think both through the hall chat and just we've done employee surveys, and I think many of us across the nation are finding that, there's a lot of isolation, at home. I think somebody on the chat was talking about they lived alone and they really appreciate seeing faces, albeit, remotely via Zoom. And so I think there's a lot of isolation. So I think, again, providing these virtual connections, I think are very important. And I think this has already been addressed. And I think somebody wrote this in the chat as well, is like, how do you kind of divide up that work-life balance when you're at home? I think a lot of us feel like we're just always, at work. And I know for myself, and I think other people have shared this as well, is that they've kind of found a spot at their house, whether it's, whatever the spot might be, that's just dedicated to work only. So I found I have a spare room, and I kind of converted it to my office / it's again, our guest room. And once I'm done with work, which is never really quite the case, but I do close the door and try to then go enjoy my family. Before I was doing work in the dining room, I know a lot of people are doing that, then I always just felt like I was always at work, even when I was just dining with my family, because I was at my desk, right? So I think that's one of the things that I'm hearing that staff talk about. With regard to the size of my college, we have about 9,000 students, so it's a mid-size college. And then I guess the second part of the question that came from Leticia Dinkins is about how many people have I spoken with. I started the hall chats, I believe, in April. And I do at least 6 a week, sometimes up to 10. So I just did a little count. So probably about 60 to 70 people I've already met with. And what I really, really love about it is I would say that about half of the individuals who have met me, I'm not typically in meetings with them. So it's just been a beautiful way to connect with individuals on the campus that I don't typically always get to meet with. So it's just been an awesome way to do that in a very casual way.
I want to try to answer a couple of other questions. We're going to try and get to almost to as many questions as we can. When you have students who speak a language other than English, this is why it's important. It's good to have detailed staff directory information, and staff directory information could include other languages. One of the commitments that we see a lot at caring campus colleges is for staff to have a better idea of what's going on in other departments, and that includes annotated directories, so that you know who speaks languages other than English, and then you can contact that person and let them know you got a call or an email or a text from a student who doesn't speak English, and could they please contact the student. The question about video on, yes, as I mentioned, we promote being able to see people when you're in a video conference or having meetings. But we have to acknowledge, as we mentioned in one of our slides, people have lives going on, and they may not want you to see what is going on while you are talking to them. So you might suggest, if you're comfortable, could you please turn your video on? But if not, I understand. You don't need to ask for a reason.
Yeah, it really does make a difference to have the video on. We have conducted a number of Caring Campus sessions across the country with dozens of colleges. And what we find is, for those that don't turn their video on, unfortunately, the point they're making, their voice is just not heard as much as having the video on. So if you take away any one thing from this webinar, it's turn that video on when talking with one another.
Brad and Dr. Barnes, perhaps you can address these issues of the micromanaging manager, strategies to help administrators and other staff respect your work hours, and how to address concerns with a too high touch administrator.
I'm going to punt that to President Barnes.
Well, I think that, whether it's virtual or in person, I think there are some kind of leadership management implications there. And again, I do believe that working remotely has really kind of made the lines between work and home more fuzzy. Again, we've been talking about that. And I think that then has implications for managers and leaders to be more mindful of that and respectful of the times during which, they're reaching out to their staff. And so I think that there's just some intention that has to happen behind that with regard to kind of managers and leaders. I know, for example, with myself, I use in Outlook, I use a feature where you could delay sending emails to people. You could construct the email and then you could say, don't send it until, let's say, Monday morning at 8 a.m. Because how many of us, you end your workday on Friday and, it was an exceptional Friday. So you've cleaned out your, your email inbox, and then you Monday morning, you have, 50 emails, because people sent them all weekend. So again, I think the being remote, it's even more important to, to work with, your managers and leaders to be sure that they're really respecting staff's time, and doing that communication within quote unquote regular business hours.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. And this is where leadership does come in, is that the president and vice presidents are really setting up the frame in which supervisors operate and the expectations of those supervisors. And so it's important that those messages come from the president, come from the vice president. It's also, as a staff member, it's possible for you to say, I can address this problem at this time, or perhaps we should talk about these issues. Because what you don't want to do is have to feel responsible at 10 o'clock on a Friday night to answer a question. And that really has, that really creates quite a challenge. We also have another question that's come up that's the opposite of micromanaging. And it says, I report to a dean who supervises multiple programs and 50+ people. It can be difficult to communicate with him since his email box is flooded. Do you have suggestions for handling this type of situation? Any thoughts about that?
I think this is the perfect situation where you can suggest to this dean that they hold regular, say twice a week, calls with staff who might have issues to ensure that your issues are being addressed. Identify common issues across staff or leaders who report to this dean so that you can identify unified responses, so that you're not relying on this dean to manage dozens and dozens of emails. You might suggest a weekly or twice weekly conference call. I think that's the perfect situation for that.
It's also possible to, at these regular staff meetings, because there are always themes that come up, address those themes, because my guess is if there's a dean who has 50 plus people, he may be getting questions that are the same from multiple people. And so once that theme has been developed, the dean is able to address it en masse as a group email.
Yeah, and this is also a culture issue. When we were all on campus, we have the type A personalities and people who do always, work beyond the work hours and so on. But when we're working from home and those boundaries are blurred, it really becomes a culture issue from the top for leadership to say, my expectations for you are now A, B, C, and D, and I would expect you to clarify your expectations for your division and department leads so that they can then clarify their expectations for staff who are in touch with students and in touch with faculty, as well as faculty and the way they interact with students. This is really a culture issue, and it has to come from the top. I'm a former therapist, so is Brad. Most people, lay people, seem to think and believe that we need to change people's attitudes to get them to change their behaviors, when in fact, for decades, the research has shown the opposite. Start by changing the behavior and the attitudes follow. And attitude change among a bunch of people is culture change. So we encourage you to start by encouraging behavior change and setting limits from the top down about how we are going to work. I'm just going to step in here. We are a continuous improvement organization. We always are looking for feedback. I came to IEBC after being a senior project director in evaluation research at WestEd, where I was for 18 years. And we really appreciate you completing, it's a very brief evaluation of the webinar and your experience. So I'm going to put a active link into the chat. We encourage you to please click on this link and quickly respond to a few questions about evaluation. It also will allow you to help us understand what other topics we ought to be covering. So please complete the evaluation for the webinar. We'll be following up with an email that also has this link to the evaluation, as well as links for the recording of this webinar.